On Sunday morning, the lake was too quiet. The boat drifted first. A small aluminum fishing boat, engine off, was bumping gently against the rocks near the public dock. Life jackets are still neatly stacked. A cooler half full of melted ice and unopened sodas. Keys in the ignition. By afternoon, the neighbors noticed the smoke, or rather, the lack of it. Every Sunday at Maple Glass Lake, the Carsons lit the same old stone fire pit beside their rental cabin. Burgers, hot dogs, music turned low. Kids laughing down by the water. It was their ritual. But this Sunday, the fire pit was cold. No smoke, no music, no kids. By evening, the owner of Cabin 7 drove out to check on them. He found the family SUV is still parked in the gravel drive. The cabin door unlocked. Towels drying on the porch rail. A board game half finished on the kitchen table. The TV was frozen on a paused movie. A mug of coffee had grown a thin skin in the cool air. In the master bedroom, 2 suitcases lay open, clothes folded inside. Phone chargers were still plugged into the wall. Wallets and IDs sat on the dresser. The only thing missing was the family. For people, 2 adults, 2 kids. No signs of a struggle. No note, no blood, just absence. Within 48 hours, Maple Glass Lake went from a quiet Midwest vacation spot to the center of one of the strangest missing persons cases in state history. Because when investigators tried to reconstruct the Carsons' final hours at the cabin, they hit the same chilling wall. They could prove the family had arrived. They could prove they had unpacked, eaten, played games, and gone to bed. But after 10:42 p.m. on Saturday, the Carsons simply stopped existing. This is the story of the lake cabin where an entire family disappeared, and the mystery that still hangs over the water every summer night. The Carson family wasn't the kind of family that usually made headlines. They were the kind that filled out PDA forms on time, showed up for school concerts, and knew the names of their mail carriers. David Carson, 42, is an accountant at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who balanced his checkbook down to the penny. Melissa Carson, 40, is a middle school English teacher. Warm, sharp-eyed, known for organizing book fairs and over-decorating her classroom. Liam, 12, obsessed with fishing, video games, and baseball. Chloe, 9, half shy, half fearless. A kid who always had a library book under one arm and a stuffed rabbit under the other. On paper, they looked like the cliché, normal American family. In reality, they were tired. David had just survived a brutal audit season at work. Melissa had spent the spring dealing with budget cuts, overcrowded classes, and a student's messy custody battle that had spilled into her classroom. There had been arguments, little ones at first, then louder. Nothing explosive, nothing police-worthy, just the sound of 2 adults stretched too thin. When Melissa's sister sent a link to a listing for Cabin 7 Maple Glass Lake, it felt like a lifeline. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors within shouting distance, and a dock. She texted, "You guys need this." David booked the cabin for a long weekend in late June. They planned it like a reset button. No work emails, no school drama, no obligations. Just 3 nights in a creaky lakeside cabin an hour north of Columbus. Photos on the rental site showed a weathered gray cabin with a covered porch, a narrow wooden dock stretching into calm water. A line of pines guards the property from the dirt road. The owner, Hank Dillard, had added his own sales pitch. Perfect for families. Quiet. Safe. I've been renting this place for 20 years. No problems. On Friday afternoon, the Carsons packed up. Fishing rods, board games, groceries, a cooler full of snacks. As they pulled out of their suburban driveway, a neighbor waved from across the street. "Lake weekend," he called. "Yeah," David answered. "We'll be back Sunday night." It was the last time anyone in their neighborhood ever saw them. The route to Maple Glass Lake wound away from the interstate, trading strip malls for cornfields and billboards for barns. The Carsons stopped once at a gas station in a small town called Merritt Falls, stocking up on ice and last-minute snacks. Security footage later showed David is paying at the register. Melissa is scanning a rack of cheap paperbacks. Liam and Chloe are bickering gently over which candy to pick. Nothing unusual. No one is following them. No one lingering in the background. They turned off the main road just before 5 p.m. onto a two-lane highway shaded by tall trees. A faded wooden sign announced, Maple Glass Lake, cabins and campground 2 miles. The cabin road was rough gravel, the kind that forced you to slow down whether you wanted to or not. Cabin 7 sat near the end of the lane, closest to the narrowest point of the lake. It shared a cove with only one other property, Cabin 6, which belonged to a retired mechanic named Earl Whitman. Whitman would later tell investigators, they seemed like good folks, waved when they pulled in. Kids ran straight for the water. Didn't look like trouble. Phone records confirmed the Carsons arrived at 5:17 p.m. Melissa texted her sister, "Made it. The cabin is old but cute. Kids already want to swim." Inside, the cabin was basic but comfortable. 2 small bedrooms, a combined kitchen and living room, a bathroom with an old clawfoot tub, a screened porch overlooking the water. There was no Wi-Fi, but there was a small TV with a DVD player and a stack of movies, and a shelf of board games with names written on the boxes in marker. The first evening passed exactly the way a rental listing would hope. Liam and Chloe splashed in the shallows while David tested the small motorboat tied to the dock. Melissa unpacked groceries and snapped a few photos of the sunset reflected in the lake. At 7:03 p.m., she posted one of those photos to her private social media account with the caption, "Finally breathing again." Neighbors around the lake reported nothing unusual. A couple at Cabin 3 saw David and Liam fishing from the dock around 8 p.m. Earl from Cabin 6 heard kids' laughter drifting across the water as he cleaned his own grill. At 9:30 p.m., Melissa's phone pinged again, this time with a text to Kayla, a fellow teacher. "This place is magic. You need to bring your crew here sometime." Kayla replied with a string of heart emojis. By 10 p.m., the lake was quiet. Lights winked off one by one around the shore. At 10:42 p.m., a motion sensor above the door of Cabin 7 registered one last small movement inside, the last verifiable sign that the Carsons were alive. After that, the cabin's digital footprint went dark. On Saturday morning, the weather was perfect. Blue sky, glassy water, a mild breeze riffling the tops of pine trees. At 7:15 a.m., a pickup truck loaded with kayaks bounced down the cabin road. Inside were Josh and Amanda Lane, a couple from Cleveland who had rented Cabin 4 for the same weekend. They remembered seeing David Carson in a t-shirt and shorts on the Cabin 7 porch, coffee mug in hand. Liam is tossing pebbles into the water. Chloe is sitting cross-legged on the dock, legs dangling. Josh waved. David waved back. Amanda later told investigators, they looked normal, happy even, like any other family on vacation. Throughout Saturday, the Carsons' presence around the lake was confirmed by multiple witnesses. The owner of the tiny lakeside bait shop remembered David and Liam buying worms and a new bobber around 10 a.m. A couple walking a dog near the public beach saw Chloe building a sandcastle while Melissa took photos. Earl from Cabin 6 heard them playing a loud board game mid-afternoon. Lots of laughter, a mock argument, someone yelling, "No way, you cheated!" At 4:22 p.m., Melissa's phone connected briefly to a distant cell tower and uploaded one more photo to her cloud account. Liam holding up a small fish, grinning, with David blurred behind him on the dock. It would later become the photo news stations used when they talked about the Carson family lake trip that never ended. That evening, between 6 o'clock and 7 p.m., the campground across the lake started a communal fire. Several people reported seeing the lights on at Cabin 7 and hearing faint music. Old rock, someone guessed, drifting over the water. At 8:19 p.m., David's phone pinged. A banking app notification, likely triggered automatically. He didn't open it. At 9:06 p.m., Melissa replied to a text from her sister. "We're about to start a movie. Kids voted for the old cartoon one we've seen a million times." Grinning faced with sweat, at 9:27 p.m., Liam sent a quick message to a friend back home. "This cabin is so creepy at night, Earl. Woods are loud." His friend replied, "Haha, send pics." No pictures were sent. What happened between that moment and 10:42 p.m., the last motion in the cabin, is still unknown. But when investigators later examined the DVD player, they found a disc halfway ejected, and the movie paused on the opening credits. Someone had started the film, someone had stopped it, and whatever interrupted the night stayed off camera. Sunday morning, the lake moved on without them. People remember what they saw. They rarely remember what they didn't do. At 7:30 a.m., Earl from Cabin 6 started his old outboard motor and puttered out to fish the east side of the lake. He noticed the Carson's boat was still tied to their dock, rocking gently. Nothing strange about that. At 9 a.m., Josh and Amanda from Cabin 4 walked past Cabin 7 on their way to the public trailhead. The SUV was parked where it had been since Friday. Curtains were drawn. No one was outside. They assumed the Carsons were sleeping in. Around 11 a.m., the wind picked up. A teenage kayaker from the campground later recalled seeing a small aluminum boat drifting aimlessly about 50 yards from the Cabin 7 dock. He figured someone had forgotten to tie it off fully. By noon, that same boat had bumped against the rocks near the public dock. 2 kids found it, climbed inside for fun, and were yelled at by a campground host. Nobody thought to connect it to Cabin 7. At 2:30 p.m., Hank Dillard, cabin owner and lifelong lake resident, drove his truck down to the rentals to check on things between guests. He expected to find trash that needed hauling, keys that needed collecting, maybe a broken chair or a clogged sink. What he found instead was nothing. No kids, no towels on the dock, no laughter, just the Carson's SUV, the cabin door unlocked, and a silence that didn't feel like relaxation. Hank knocked on the door. No answer. He stepped inside cautiously. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Coffee, bacon, and something else time. The second thing he noticed was the board game on the table. Scrabble tiles midward, small bowls of now stale chips. In the kitchen sink were 4 plates with dried sauce, 2 cereal bowls, a pan with bits of scrambled egg. The trash can held Saturday's packaging. By the back door, 2 pairs of flip-flops sat side by side. Hank called out their names. No one replied. He checked the bedrooms. The beds looked slept in. Blankets twisted, pillows dented. But there were no suitcases on the floor. They lay open on the dresser, clothes folded but not put away. In the bathroom, for damp towels hung from hooks. Hank stepped back outside, walked down to the dock, and felt his stomach drop. The rope that should have tied the Carson boat to the cleat dangled into the water, loose. Every instinct honed by decades on the lake kicked in. Something was wrong, very wrong. Hank called the sheriff. Sheriff Laura McKinnon had worked rural cases her whole career. She knew the difference between tourists being flaky and something is wrong. When she got the call from Hank Dillard about a missing family at Cabin 7, she rolled her eyes at first. Vacationers left early all the time. But then Hank added, their car's here, their luggage is here, their wallets are here, and their boat just washed up at the public dock. That got her attention. McKinnon drove out with 2 deputies. They arrived just after 4 p.m. The cabin road was quiet, the air heavy with the smell of pine and lake water. Hank met them in the driveway, hat in hand. I've been renting this place for 20 years, he said. Nobody just leaves like this. Inside, McKinnon moved slowly, forcing herself to see what was there before jumping to what was not. Kitchen table. For chairs, one slightly pushed back as if someone had stood up mid-game. Living room. DVD player on, TV paused. Remote on the arm of the couch. The throw blanket crumpled as if someone had been lying there. Entryway. Melissa's purse on a small side table, open, wallet, and keys inside. David's wallet and car keys were beside it. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no overturned furniture, nothing that screamed struggle. McKinnon ordered her deputies to photograph every room, bag anything that looked out of place, check around the cabin for footprints or disturbed ground. They found faint tracks near the dock, but with the weekend's foot traffic, it was impossible to say whose. The deputies also canvassed the neighboring cabins. Earl from Cabin 6 frowned when they asked when he'd last seen the Carsons. "Yesterday afternoon," he said. "Kids down by the water. Dad is on the dock. I figured they'd gone into town today." Josh and Amanda from Cabin 4 echoed the same. "We just thought they were inside." Amanda said, "You don't assume an entire family has vanished." By early evening, McKinnon had to make a call. She radioed dispatch and requested a wider search around the lake, a request for state investigators, a ping on all 4 family members' cell phones. The initial phone data showed the same unsettling pattern. All 4 devices had last connected to the nearest tower just before midnight Saturday. After that, nothing. No calls, no texts, no data activity. McKinnon stepped onto the porch and stared at the water. The cabin behind her looked like a family had just stepped out for a walk. The lake in front of her looked like it had swallowed them whole. When people go missing near water, investigators always start with the obvious question. Did they drown? The state dive team arrived Monday morning. They began with a methodical grid search around the Cabin 7 dock, the area where the Carson boat had been found, the deeper channel near the narrow part of the lake. Visibility was poor. Decades of silt and plant matter turned the water into murky green soup. Divers could barely see an arm's length in front of them. Over 2 days, they recovered an old, rusted anchor, a discarded tire, several beer cans, a pair of sunglasses. They did not find bodies, clothing, any sign of the Carsons. The boat itself was examined by crime scene techs. It showed no obvious damage, no blood, no signs of tampering with the motor. The life jackets were still on board. The cooler, half-melted ice long gone, contained only unopened drinks. If the family had gone out on the water and capsized, something should have surfaced. A shoe, a jacket, a body. The lake stayed quiet. On land, search teams worked through the woods surrounding the cabin road. Volunteers, deputies, and state troopers combed hiking trails, animal paths, ditches, and ravines. They found nothing. No scrap of clothing, no dropped phone, no disturbed patch of ground that might indicate a hurried burial. As the days wore on, reporters descended. News vans lined the access road. Headlines called it the Lake Cabin Vanishing. Neighbors and cabin owners who had once complained about city people now locked their doors at night, kept their kids indoors, and watched the water with new suspicion. Sheriff McKinnon stood in front of microphones and said the same careful words. "We are pursuing all leads. At this time, we have not ruled anything out." Privately, though, she knew one thing. The Carsons had not just walked away from their lives. People who walk away take wallets. People who walk away take at least one phone. Someone or something had interrupted an ordinary family weekend and erased 4 people without leaving a trace. And the more McKinnon dug into the Carsons' lives back home, the more she began to wonder if the answer to what happened lay far from the lake. Investigators always start with the scene, but once the scene stops talking, they go to the people. Detectives from both the local sheriff's office and the state bureau traveled to the Carsons' hometown. Neighbors there were shocked. They were normal. One said, "Dave mowed his lawn in perfect diagonal lines. Melissa always brought muffins to the block party. This doesn't make sense." Coworkers described David as competent but quiet. His boss noted that he'd recently been staying late, taking more work home, seeming tightly wound, but not in a way anyone had flagged. Melissa's coworkers described her as organized, tired, very protective of her students. Nothing that screamed, "We're planning to disappear." But as detectives went through financial records, a different picture emerged. The Carsons were carrying more debt than their friends realized. A second mortgage was used to pay medical bills from a hospital stay Chloe had needed 2 years earlier. Maxed out credit cards from home repairs and school expenses. The car loan is behind by 2 months. On David's work computer, investigators found recent searches for family annihilation cases, life insurance payouts. How far can you track a missing person's phone? That set off alarms. It wouldn't be the first time a stressed parent had decided to end everything, taking their family with them. But the theory collided with one stubborn fact. There were no life insurance policies that would have paid out if the Carsons all died at the same time. No secret accounts. No hidden transfers. If David had planned a murder-suicide, he'd done it without the usual financial breadcrumbs. And then there was Melissa. On her personal email, detectives found a string of unsent drafts. Letters she'd written in the weeks before the trip but never sent. One read, "I don't know how much longer we can keep pretending everything's fine. The kids feel it. I feel like I'm drowning in the same 3 rooms every day. This lake trip is supposed to be a reset, but I'm scared we're just packing our problems into the car with us." Another, "Sometimes I think about just driving past the exit, just not going back. But then I think of Mom, of the kids, of what that would do to them. I'm tired of being the one who holds it all together." The letters weren't proof of anything criminal, but they were proof of pressure. On the evening news, commentators speculated. Maybe the family had staged their own disappearance. Maybe they'd driven away in someone else's car. Maybe they'd found a way to vanish on purpose. Sheriff McKinnon stared at the photos from the cabin again. The unfinished board game, the open suitcase. The coffee mug is still half full. She shook her head. "People don't plan a clean getaway," she muttered, "and forget to grab their car keys." Every big case eventually spawns a small army of tips. Most are useless, some are bizarre, and once in a while, one scratches at something that feels important. 2 weeks after the disappearance, a truck driver called the tip line. He'd been passing through Merritt Falls the Friday of the Carsons' trip and stopped at the same gas station they had. He remembered them, not because they were remarkable, but because of who else was there. There was this guy, the trucker said, standing near the coffee machines. He kept staring at the kids, at the girl especially. He described a man in his late 30s, wearing a faded baseball cap, a long-sleeved shirt despite the heat. No obvious truck or car nearby. He wasn't with the trucker insisted. But when the dad went to pay, I saw the guy watching the mom load the kids back into the SUV. Real slow. Detectives pulled the gas station footage again. They had combed it before, looking only at the family. This time, they widened their focus. There he was, a man leaning against the coffee station, head down, ball cap low. As the Carsons entered, he straightened. While David filled the tank and Melissa picked snacks, the man lingered near the door, always on the edge of the frame. When the family left, he stepped outside, but no camera caught him getting into a vehicle. Detectives froze the best frame they could and sent it around to neighboring departments, to the State Fusion Center, quietly to a few federal contacts. A clerk at a discount store on the opposite side of town called in a match. "He comes in sometimes," she said, "pays in cash, never talks much." Receipts from that store, cross-referenced with timestamps, suggested the man might be a local drifter or seasonal worker. Police canvassed homeless encampments and cheap motels. They never found him. Theories multiplied. Had he followed the Carsons to the lake? Had he already planned to be there? Was he nothing more than a lonely guy with bad social instincts who happened to be caught on video near a soon-to-be famous family? Sheriff McKinnon pinned his blurry face on the case board anyway. In the corner of the same board, she pinned another photo, a faded missing person flyer of Rachel Flynn, the barista who'd vanished years earlier after closing up the cafe on the same highway the Carsons had taken. Bottom corner, last seen wearing a faded baseball cap. Coincidence? Or a pattern nobody had seen until a whole family vanished? As national attention faded, local gossip grew teeth. People whispered that Cabin 7 was cursed. Hank Dillard hated that. It was bad for business. But when detectives dug deeper into his rental records, they uncovered another thread. 2 summers earlier, a couple from Chicago had rented Cabin 7 for a long weekend. They'd checked in on a Friday. On Saturday morning, the wife had driven into Merritt Falls alone to pick up groceries. She returned to find the front door is slightly ajar. The TV is on. Her husband's phone is on the couch. No sign of him. He turned up 3 hours later, trudging out of the woods near the cabin, clothes muddy, face scraped, with no memory of where he'd been. Doctors later chalked it up to a stress-induced fugue state. The couple divorced the following year. 3 summers before that, a family with teenage boys reported waking up in the cabin to the sound of footsteps on the porch at 2 a.m. When the father opened the door, no one was there, but they found wet footprints leading from the lake to the cabin and stopping at the door. No prints going back. Hank had written it off as teenagers playing pranks. He hadn't mentioned any of this to the police when the Carsons vanished. "You think every weird story is important," he protested later. "You'd never rent the place again." But Sheriff McKinnon found the pattern unnerving. People are losing time near the cabin. People hearing footsteps. People are going missing on the same side of the lake. She didn't believe in curses. She did believe in routes. If someone, say a drifter from the gas station or a predator who knew the area, wanted a place to lure tourists, Cabin 7 was ideal. Isolated from the other rentals. A narrow access road. Woods are thick enough to hide anything. A lake deep enough to swallow evidence. But every time they searched for the physical proof of that theory, the ground stayed stubbornly blank. No hidden bunker, no disturbed soil, no forgotten shallow grave. Cabin 7 gave them stories. It refused to give them facts. Years passed. Other stories pushed the Carsons off the front page. The case migrated from active binders to the cold case shelf, but it never fully closed. Every summer, new families rented cabins at Maple Glass Lake. Every summer, someone asked, "Is this the place where that family vanished?" Cabin 7 sat empty for a long time. Hank eventually stopped listing it online. He couldn't compete with the whispers. Then, 5 years after the disappearance, a true crime podcast did a 3-part series on vacations gone wrong. They devoted an entire episode to the Carson case. The show's host visited the lake, interviewed Hank, Sheriff McKinnon, and even tracked down the now-grown-up Lane couple and the teenage kayaker who'd seen the drifting boat. The podcast sparked a wave of new tips. Most led nowhere. One, however, made McKinnon sit up straighter. A caller from out of state claimed that, years earlier, while camping on the far side of the lake, he'd seen lights moving through the woods, 3 flashlights, weaving through trees near the narrowest point of the water. He heard voices, thought nothing of it, until there was a sudden, sharp scream that cut off too quickly. He told himself it was a drunk fight. He hadn't reported it. Not until he heard the podcast and realized that the date of his camping trip matched the weekend the Carsons disappeared. It was one more piece in a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. Sheriff McKinnon, now closer to retirement than she liked to admit, drove out to the old cabin one last time. The porch sagged more. The dock was half rotten. Inside, dust coated every surface. But the board game was still there, in a cabinet, its box now faded. She stood in the silence and tried to imagine. A knock on the door late at night. A familiar voice calling from outside. Panic dash toward the lake. Or a quiet decision around the table. A family choosing to step into the dark together. Neither scenario fully fits. As she left, McKinnon paused at the edge of the water. The lake was calm, its surface reflecting a sky that had forgotten. We like to believe that the world keeps perfect records. Phone logs, cameras, GPS pings. But sometimes, a cheap rental cabin, a narrow stretch of water, and 7 unrecorded minutes are enough to erase a family. People still ask what happened to the Carsons. Did they meet a stranger they didn't recognize from a gas station? Did someone they already knew follow them to their safe weekend getaway? Did the pressures and secrets of their life at home finally crack open in the middle of the woods? Or is there something about certain places, certain roads, certain lakes, certain cabins, that seems to collect unsolved stories like silt? We may never know. What we do know is this. The last provable fact in the Carson case is simple and ordinary. At 10:42 p.m. on a Saturday, motion sensors in a small lake cabin recorded one final movement. A shadow passing through a room. A person standing up, a door opening. After that, the cabin, the lake, and the world went still. for people stepped out of the frame. And whatever happened next, the lake has decided to keep for itself. As always, subscribe and follow Enter the Crime for more stories.